Good morning. Defund the police. Who would ever even have considered such a thing? That people would want to defund the police. It says in Pirkei Avos that if you don't have a system of authority in place, people would swallow each other up. And we see, of course, in this week's parsha, good morning. I got to get the police off my screen. We have to defund those guys. Because I can't figure out, here we go, because it opens up a whole new app. So, of course, in this week's parsha, we say, in all your gates, in all your cities, you have to put not only judges, but police. So why should we defund them? I wish I could keep that going. It's a bit distracting for me. I wrote a poem about it even. Well, not so much about the distracting part of it, but winding brook, a straight man finds his groove. I want to see the old men are going to come out, the machal tzdikim lasid, and they're going to dance with the young people. That's going to be really cool. So find your groove, straight guy. God wants you to celebrate him. You have to have the groove of the LPs of the old day with the vinyl and all. So you see a very interesting contradiction that here in this week's parsha that we just learned, you shall have officers. What do we say in the Haftarah? Of course, we're always progressing. The Haftarah is always looking forward. It's forward-looking. The verse in Isaiah 1:26, as you probably know. I will restore your magistrates as of old, and your counselors as of yore. And you probably don't even know what that means if you don't speak Shakespearean, but I know most of my listeners probably do by now. My children call it Shakespearean, but now they adopted that. I knew that would even surpass me, of course. But they at first made fun of it. I guess they feared it a bit. Now they're like using words that I don't know. And also the kids come up with these expressions that are always evolving all the time. It's interesting. So we're promised that only judges and advisors are going to return as of days of yore. That's what we look forward to, having our judges in place and our advisors. What happened to the police? Should I get the music back on to make it the point to drive home? What about the police? Should we defund them? When Matisyahu sings Message in a Bottle, a song with the most beautiful lyrics, should we defund that guy because of it? I don't think so. To me, he made it. I don't care. I'll let him make music for me. I just wish he would be less depressing in his lyrics. Okay, Message in a Bottle, is that also a very depressing lyric? The guy's writing these messages in a bottle and everybody else is doing the same thing. Wow, everybody wants the same thing, but nobody turns to his friend and say, maybe this is the person that I'm meant to be very close with. It's always the person that's furthest away, that the celebrities, we worship them, not our children or our spouses or our Uncle Sam. That could be learned the other way too. Okay, so it doesn't really make sense, does it? Also, in light of the Pirkei Avos, it says if you don't have officers, what's going to happen? Rabbi Chananya Skanik Hanim Eimer, Pirkei Avos 3:2. It says, having mispal b'shleim shel malchus, daven for the peace of the authority, of the reign of the whatever nation you happen to be in. Shel malei meira'ah, for were it not for funding the authority figure, Ishas re'ayu chayim bloi, a person would swallow up his friend. And this beautiful Bartanur, which is like the Rashi on the Mishnayos, it says, okay, first he says, for the welfare of the government and even that of the nations of the world. You have to daven for the Gentile authority figures to have the ability to reign in their people. Why? Because people would swallow each other up, as it is written in Habakkuk, and you make man like the fish of the sea. Did you ever think that everyone's a Pisces like you? Just like the fish of the sea Each one that is bigger than his fellow swallows his fellow. It's all about who's the biggest. Size does matter. So too people, were it not for the fear of the government, each one who is bigger than his fellow would swallow his fellow. So this is his friend. What does they call him? Reyehu, his friend. That's the term in Shir Shirim. And also it's a term, interestingly, for the shepherd. Friend and shepherd are the same word. Good morning. Good vach. Can you say hello with good vach, or it's only goodbye? I don't know why I say goodbye, I say hello. So you'd swallow each other up like fish. Whoever's biggest, that's the guy that's going to take the throne. Okay. So it seems like, why would you defund the police? Yet we see in the future to come, you will defund the police. So this is my introduction to the Rebbe's Sicha in Parsha Shoftim. So on Sunday, I'm still holding by the previous. I haven't had time to enter the new week yet. Forgive me that. So next year it will be new to you. On the right Parsha. That would be cool. So there's a fascinating Sicha. The Rebbe unfolds some of this. Maybe just, let me see if I have any other portion I want to do in these verses. Okay, I don't. Okay, it's a little bit, makes it more graphic with the Rashis on the first Parsha. Shoftim v'shoftim titan l'chol b'chol she'racha. You should put judges and officers. Why do you need Shoftim? Are the judges who pronounce sentence, and Shetrim, what are the Shetrim? These are the officers, are those who chastise the people at their, that is the judge's order, beating and binding the recalcitrant with a stick and a strap until he accepts the judge's sentence. That's the Gemara Sanhedrin 16b, which Rashi brings on the commentary into that in this verse. Okay. Oh my goodness, the iPad doesn't register my fingers. Here we go. Okay, the rest is I think, self-understood. I don't know what to, all the Rashis here. I think for our purposes, that's probably suffices. So I want to get into this Sicha. Just going to learn 2 sections, I think, and maybe string in the middle with a little paraphrasing. The introduction is interesting, and basically what the Rebbe does here, contrary to what he usually speaks about, here he gives a lot of attention to the role of Navi and prophet and advisor. Less so perhaps to Shoftim, to the judges, though I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. And he focuses on himself, of course, which is unusual. And the reason why I think it's unusual for there to be a cult of personality associated with Chabad, though you could argue that there is room for that. I don't think there is room based on what I'm saying now. When the Rebbe draws attention to himself, he's primarily doing it since he wants it to be relevant to you. He's saying, how can I learn from such a concept that exists, but it relates to me in a way that affects my personal decision-making and mentality? So you have to identify in you that you have a Rebbe inside you. You have a spark of Mashiach within you that everything begins with. Because Bishvili Nivra Ha'ilam, the world was created for you. So your life story is the salvation of all of humanity, packed into your little world. The Nevi'im are back. I think I have to agree with you on that, even though that's completely radical. I just can't, for a simple reason. Best you would not allow the world to go without messengers. There is no way, in the darkest time after the worst time in history of the Holocaust, he would not leave us alone without messengers. So here the Rebbe focuses on the importance of that. And of course, this could be seen as a prayer. If you don't want to be, the Rebbe is giving a prayer, we should have such a person. I, of course, being a Lubavitcher, knows that the Rebbe means in the simplest of all senses, that the Rebbe's teachings are the guidance for our generation. So, but you cannot fascinate on that point because it expels the duty that's upon us, that we have to be the Rebbe in our surrounding. The Rebbe focuses on that most of the year. So the Rebbe divides up to what are you going to have in the future to come? You're going to have judges and advisors. You defunded the police, right? You don't have to be walking on the moon anymore. Well, actually it is. It's a leap towards the moon that you can never reach. In Kiddush Levana, you never reach it. You're jumping, but you never reach it. So too your enemies should, I don't know what, blast or whatever we say. I don't remember. So in place of the officers, you have advisors. What are advisors? It's someone who speaks to you. The Rebbe refers to it as a guter Freund. So the bestie has another source. I think this is the second source for bestie, but here it doesn't mean God. Here it means the Rebbe. Or whoever your personal guiding force in your world is, if you don't like the Lubavitch lexicon. I personally love it. I love the idea of having a master. Like I always wanted, when I was in the non-Orthodox realm, before I became Baal Tshuva and Chabad, I wanted to have a guru or a karate dude because I thought that wax on, wax off thing is really cool. And to be able to find out your inner strengths. And I had a yogi, right, who would tell me that his guru is in the other world. So it wasn't so strange to me when it came to Chabad, when the Rebbe spoke like that about the previous Lubavitch Rebbe, his father-in-law, that he was still the guiding force in his life. He was the Rebbe. As far as the Rebbe was concerned, his father-in-law was still Rebbe. And he was just a spokesperson. So the Rebbe here in this Sikha speaks about, in Parsha Shoftim, it speaks a lot about prophets and how Niv Sfasayim express the idea of Nevuah. It's the utterance of the lips. They're animated of them, their own accord, because it's an embodiment of Besti himself. That's why Bilam, the wicked prophet, splattered on the ground like an omelet when he had prophecy. That would be a good haiku, actually. That's what happened. He just plotzed on the ground in every sense. So prophecy is a bit of embodiment of Besti. And if you're not a vehicle for that, if you're not a healthy person, he was not healthy in his relationships in the most simple way possible. His Besti was a chamor. Mashiach's going to ride upon the chamor. Bilam had the wrong idea about that. I think that was actually the mother of the Mashiach, the donkey that Mashiach's going to ride on was Bilam's donkey. I'm pretty sure. Or something like that. When we get back into the season, we'll sharpen our pencil on that. To me, each Lubavitcher Rebbe is a Gilgul of all the other Lubavitcher Rebbes with their very own personalities. Their personalities are very different. And their life stories, very different in terms of what they had to encounter. So there's a definite narrative being played on the change of the throne. It represents a very different narrative, leading up to the time that Malbim describes in those beautiful letters when everyone in the world is going to have, before Mashiach's coming, as it says also in the Sikha, there's going to be the return of prophecy. The Rebbe here in the Sikha emphasizes himself, that he is the one. And I could prove that at so much length, but I don't find it like the proper fascination, and everybody else does that. I just don't think it's necessary. But I do want to show you with the way the Rebbe interprets what a yayet says. What is in place of the police that we defunded in the future to come? It's a yayet, it's an advisor. You're going to have... Why would you need it? Like Kanaf Eid Maracha, your master is not going to be concealed anymore. You're going to learn directly from Besti himself, God. So what role will a Yayetz play? I think it will become clear when we learn some of the Sikha. Okay, so let's keep that in mind as one of the things that's a bit irritating that has to be resolved. But it's good to have a little bit of mystery when you're entering a topic. So defund the police, there's going to be a transition from the very obvious need for policemen. When you read Tanakh, you'll see how important it is to have policemen when you have even your own children sometimes rising up because their hairstyle is better than yours. Adoniyahu, isn't that the one who got caught in his hair and it was his downfall, his vanity? Wow. But David HaMelech has so much compassion, he didn't want him killed, but how many spears went through him or whatever that happened. Okay. So we're going to go make a transition from policemen to advisors. Advisors, the Rebbe equates with prophecy here. Particularly, the main prophet, the Mashiach, the Moshe Rabbeinu of the generation, who has the main prophecy, and he is the embodiment of Moshe himself. And that is a power that speaks to everybody in our times through the kayach, the power of something called an advisor, so which is prophecy. So that becomes, I think, the backdrop of this bit of a meandering sikha. Some of it I want to go through a bit quickly. I know by the time I gave all the introductions, I could have just done it in a cool pace. I'm putting all the chess pieces in place. It's you can't get lost. You have to put it always in context. Where are we going with this? What is the message here? What are we meant to take from this? Ultimately, it's going to come down to the means whereby to makabel zayin de giluyim von Yemais Mashiach Yoyitzayach is pneumistic and verstand, is to develop an internal appreciation. Once you do that, that is the vehicle to receive all the revelations of the days of Mashiach. It is possible in advance of the times of Mashiach, as we will see. And that's the whole purpose of these times, to develop yourself as a vehicle to be able to withstand this great revelation of something that will be culturally revolutionary, because your very motivations are going to be changing. There's going to be an inner integrity that's going to be obvious, described as Avir Esruach Hatuma Min Ha'aretz. Or is it Esruach Hatuma Avir Min Ha'aretz? The spirit of impurity I will cause to pass away from the land. So that is the stage that you will not need police. Why would you need police? If you're going to end up having this spirit of prophecy that makes you completely want to be one with Bestie in all of his ways, you won't need police, but you will need an advisor. An advisor, I think we're going to see, is, well, let's just leave that as the question. We'll see. So I'm going to try this, do it in two parts. I just want to read the beginning. We quoted that verse in the beginning, that first words of the parsha, I will give you judges and officers, is da der Yud von der Navi HaGeula. There's the testimony, there's the prophecy of the prophet of redemption. In Yeshayahu 1:26, it says, I will return your judges in the former times and your advisors like at first. So he points out why it changes from officers to advisors. Okay, I'm just going to probably... And the Rebbe says here, like, in a very radical statement, he says, we now are in the time of the fulfillment of the prophecy of the Shiva Sheftayach that I'm returning your judges and your advisors. So there is this force, also advisors, who always had judges throughout all of our history. They had relatively high and low degrees of authority, and perhaps worthiness also, but still they're demanding or requiring of honor. I wonder if there is a permission of some type of reluctance in order to draw attention to the judges of the need for cultural change, which they might be reluctant to because they're not really in the world. And they should be in the world. They have to actually learn about Hilchos Avodah Zarah because they have to understand what people might do wrong. So they have to immerse themselves even in the most lowly part of this world, which is idolatry. They have to know it. So to me, that's a very major directive that the Torah, that your judges have to be familiar with the culture. Because I've been told by the chief rabbi of our city that, there we go. That there's so much range in halacha regarding the aspects of our Torah that are most sensitive to people's personal lives. There's such a wide spectrum available to the rabbis to use that it's entirely based on their own subjectivity. The power of that to affect and by de facto control people's lives is humongous. And therefore, with the greatest sensitivity, we have to point judges who not necessarily are the biggest encyclopedias, because who needs that today when you could just Google things so easily? Everything's at our fingertips, and that's just a matter of the integrity of the person who's looking into finding the truth. And then there's so much spectrum of subjectivity. You have to be in the world. You cannot advise people if you don't know what you're advising. You cannot. It's absolutely reckless and cavalier. Anyways, the Rebbe says that we're actually holding by a time where we do have advisors. Per Avram Abulafia, the gates of knowledge were opened in the year 5000, 1239, and prophecy then returned. The Ari concurs in this. So the Rebbe is reinforcing that big time and saying explicitly that we have a Mashiach in our times, who's the Moshe Rabbeinu of our times, and has the ability of prophecy that is with what the Baal Shem Tov called the Or Haganas. Okay, Kabbalah also uses that term. They would see, the Baal Shem Tov and his cohorts, the Mittler Rebbe, I don't know if I can use the word cohorts, they would see from one end of the world to the other, literally with the physical eye, and they would tell the people what they're seeing. That's the light that God, Ganzai B'Teira. He concealed that within the Torah. So the Rebbe sets up here, the ability to have proper advice is through learning Chassidus. When you do that, you'll be a channel for the right direction in your life. But he says that over the course of about 20 pages. So you got to trust me a little bit in some of this. You're not going to be able to read everything inside. The parts that I underline, I figure are very important. Okay, here's something that's important. I don't want to miss this. The mashma sham da shiva shaytayach ya'id lifnei by Mashiach. Besim dekasav ki achreichem yelech yikra lecha ir hatzedek. So this idea of that what's spoken about as the prophecy in Isaiah, the Rebbe has said that this is already being fulfilled, that God has returned our judges and our advisors. This is supposed to be in the time preceding the coming of Mashiach. As it says in Parashat Mishnayos, the Rambam Sanhedrin, Aleph Gimel. Okay? So there will be a time where Nit dermant Shaitrim, and the Rebbe just set up that this is being filled now. You're not going to need police. And here we're saying that defund the police is the most insane idea you've ever heard. Yet it's a prophecy that's going to be fulfilled. I think also hand in hand with guaranteed income, because to me the two things are the same. You just pay people not to riot. It's insane, I agree. But I think that's in line with this prophecy. But why will you be able to do it? Because ultimately, they're only, for the most part, it wasn't a pogrom. It was in some senses a pogrom. But I don't think it compares to historic pogroms when they were out to just kill Jews, God forbid. I think this had more Nikes motivating it than killing Jews, though they're not too far away. But if that's the worst that our riots can do, and we can actually absorb that itself is a tremendous expression of the evolution of consciousness. When the worst we can do is steal a pair of Nikes. And they steal phones that don't even work, because that's how centralized all the capitalism is already. You can control your merchandise from afar. The Nikes won't work one day. They're going to light up or something and be connected to Wi-Fi, and it won't work on you when you steal them. You will not need police. Defund the police. I thought it was insane, the idea, but here's my source, and I'm going to obviously have to temper it. You can't just say defund the police and say there's going to be let riots begin. Obviously, that's not what I'm saying. But there is an element that is happening now. It's called the slaughter of the Yetzer Hara. The idea of talking about the Yetzer Hara as this evil thing that wants to tempt you away from God is a thing of the past, I'm telling you. The way you have to look at it is, I have something that's directing me this way in order to draw my attention to a certain fascination that I have that has a parallel in Judaism. It's simply a means of finding the advice. Let it be through prophecy, as the Rebbe says here. The prophecy is the Pnimis Torah, learning the Pnimis Torah of the Rebbe. The Rebbe says is the means to draw this power out in our world, so you have this direction of Besti himself going through another bestie, which I have to read you those words, that the Rebbe calls the Rebbe a guter Freund, a bestie. Everything in holiness has its counterpart in utter holiness, right? As it says in Sefer Yetzirah. Zelu mazeh. Bara Lakim, I think it says. The Seymour is not working again. With the Nevi'im, they will incarnate. Oh, I just shifted the view. That is absurd. And I don't even know. There we go. You have to do it in 3-line clips because my fingers don't register on the machine. Everything, not because I filed them down. Everything in holiness has its counterpart in unholiness. With the Nevi'im, there will incarnate exceptionally evil people too. I think we've Yotzi that with Hitler Yomach Shemai and all of his cohorts. There's the use of that word properly. Until the disappearance of the Yetzer Hara when Mashiach comes. I'm claiming that the power to do this is now. And you see that from the riots, how that they got out of hand, for sure. But they didn't turn into a pogrom in the historic sense. And these people were more charged up with rage than anybody. And they did do some horrible, violent things, even to people. But it was not rampant like it could have been. And I think that is an expression of this destruction of the Yetzer Hara. Even though you see in politics the most vile puppeteering and controlling and clowns as representatives and leaders, not real heroes and people that you look up to. And now we pull down the statues of our former people we thought were great, and now we say they're not great, they're worthy of the what kind of bird? The pigeon crap that they get where they are, wherever they're set up. And now they're drawn through the street in the mud. So we've totally destroyed the idols of former times, and we have the only thing that replacing it is hip-hop music and that kind of culture, the gangster mentality with no values at all to replace it. Nothing of value on either side, from the right to the left. There's no value whatsoever that you could see in the world. So to watch the news is simply a waste of time, in my very humble opinion. So here we say that there's a yayetz that's going to replace the police. The defund the police is going to be replaced with the concept of, is this a social worker? Let's see. Masha'ikana yayetz is kishmai. The yayetz is like its name suggests. Ergit an eitze teva. He gives good advice. B'lashon Chazal, as the sages say, eitze teva kaimalan. Was das beweist, as der yayetz als yayetz steht be'erach zu dem shemei makabel ha'etza. We just said how the shefet is infinitely greater. Okay, we didn't learn it inside so much. That a judge represents a part of a person that's not able to relate to you. He's just sitting there defining Torah law. And how is he coming out with this Torah law? We have to go, that's another focus. The Rebbe Rashab writes at length about that. It all has to do with being genuine and really wanting to God's will to come out in the most sincere way. But the ability to relate to the rulings of the judges is the power of the yayetz. He gives good advice, and it shows on the advisor in his role as advisor, because he has another role here. The Rebbe is talking about himself as he's both a shefet and a yayetz. And he's a rabbi and he's a prophet. But interestingly, I think the prophet is here. Usually you think of prophecy as getting the words of God, and actually the Rebbe speaks about that here. But here he makes it synonymous with the advisor role. So what is the advisor? Eitze teva kaimalan, was das beweist, as der yayetz als yayetz steht be'erach zu dem shemei makabel ha'etza. He has a relationship with the person he's advising. He's not infinitely aloof from them. And the Rebbe read their yayetz to him, and therefore, this advisor speaks to the person he's advising, nit mil maila lamata, not as imposing law upon him. Even the shefet uses the officer as his whip, as I think we said the Rashi, or maybe we skipped that. The Rashi describes, and we did that quickly, that it basically the extension of the judge to, why should the judge have to sully himself to whip the guy himself? He has a guy to whip the guy to do what he says. But in place of that, you're going to have someone who speaks to you in the most beautiful way. We're going to call him the bestie, the good to friend. Okay? Which to me, that's awesome. To have another application for the good to friend, now it means an advisor, the Rebbe. in this sense, in this role, as someone who advises you, who directs you. Maybe, okay, we'll see how. Was das beweist, als der Yetz als Yetz steht be'erach zu dem Shemeu Mekabel ha'etza. The person who's listening, he's close to him. Is the Rebbe read their Yetz to him, so he's not imposing through his superior position upon the other, like a command and a decree, nor wie a gute Freund, but rather as a good friend. Was redt mit ihm, Shava b'Shava, speaking to him as equals. Und gibt him Eitzateva, and he gives him his best advice, wie soll sich aufführen, what the person should do in his life, because he's giving you his perspective. He doesn't say it's superior, the opposite, as an equal. Just this is a different perspective. Here it is. You get the 3D effect from two different vantage points. You get 3D. Some depth of advice. An Eitza was der Shemea versteht. This is a type of advice. So all of a sudden, it was something you had to have Kabbalah sale. You had to just accept the yoke of heaven. And now, that very thing that you had to have as a yoke of heaven is expressed to you in such a way that you understand it. Nasev Nishma. This is the Nishma being fulfilled. That you're going to have a force in your world called the Yayetz. In Karate Kid, it's, I don't know what, the master. No, sensei, which is I think that's a very cool idea of a sensei. Whatever it means to you, maybe you're a cook. So you want a sensei guidance to be the best cook you could be. I don't see why not. And if it's not through somebody else, go to a cave, but find there that the king's in the field outside the cave. He brought you to this cave away from everybody else because he himself will guide you. So there's a force within you that we're going to get to if we ever get there, that is this guiding force, this Mashiach within that's going to guide you, the power of a Yayetz within you. But here we're describing that this is embodied in the form of a guter Freund, the bestie, was redt mit im Shav b'Shav, who speaks person to person on equal, on par. Al Eitzateva as the Shemea versteht, that's something that could be understood in the own mind of the person, so it's not being forced, he's not being compelled, he's not being coerced or controlled. And es legt sich bei him, and the advice sits in him up, and filled, and he feels as das is for him, and that for him, this advice, dem Shemea, for him, the person who listens, a good sach. He sees for himself that's a good thing. Oiv nit, is das nit kein Eitzateva. If he didn't see that it's actually good for him, he wouldn't see this as a good advice. So the idea is the advisor, this power of advice, Yayetz, that replaces the defunded police. In the times the Rebbe says is now, and he gives a source, that it precedes the time of Mashiach, the Parish of Rama Mishnayos. Oiv nit is das nit kein Eitzateva nor a chayka ugzera. It would just be seen as the decree and a law from above. So there's going to be this force that you see, every advice that you get, you're going to see, wow, that rings true to me. Thank you, Bestie Hashem, for giving me Bestie, a good advice, someone who could actually set me on the right path, and I could see it with my own eyes so I don't feel like I'm being controlled. That is Mashiach unfolding in your life. Okay, so let's... Masha'inkim as the Eitzer hat debreya mekayem zayin oder nit. You have free choice to receive the advice that you get. There's a brera, there is a choice. The only thing is you see that for you, this is a good approach. It becomes clear, there's a clarity that unfolds in this time that we live in now. Okay, so you have two forces. You have given a siyomil mailo, a inspiration from above, shaloi be'erech adam, which is beyond the capacity of the person. Sometimes he's pushed into situations that he didn't expect to have to encounter, and it brings out forces in him that end up retroactively being seen as inspirational forces in his life, catalysts in his life, but he didn't appreciate it the whole time. That's more the idea of a shayfet, a judge imposing things upon you that at the time you didn't understand. But there's also a yetz, zayin im Messiah ba'efen shel hislapshus pnimis. This is an inspiration that empowers your own faculties of cognizance and consciousness. So your own ability to come to the correct path. not seen as something that's imposed upon you or circumstantial, but something that's of your volition. You just happen to be guided in the right path. Ba'ifin as filled as das is seine atayva, in a way that you feel that this is good. So this is a very metaphysical reality that's going to unfold more and more as each day progresses. This feeling that things are going on the right path. There's a reason for all this meshugas in the world, that everyone's covering their face like terrified sheep in muzzles. It's terrifying, that comparison. I think the converse of that, I don't know, breathe in your own air, that your air should, I don't know, come up with some flip side of that that's good, because it's terrifying if we were all becoming these, at one point in The Handmaid's Tale, whatever it's called, they do the mouth thing and they zip up their lips and people are silenced and nobody has a voice and everyone can't gather to protest, and if you do, it's only to steal Nikes. Okay, so a couple of areas from this sikha that I just have to go through. It does pay to really get into the pages and pages of comparison that the Rebbe makes between officers and advisors. But here's one section. Let's just read a few more words. The very reason that there has to be advisors like the former times, that the whole purpose of advisors is that inwardly you could appreciate and feel in Torah mitzvahs and Yiddishkeit, in the path that Besti prescribes in the Torah and Judaism, as das wird sein tchila und shar, that this becomes kivat tchila, like the beginning, meaning a gateway, und nit es bleibt wie a davar chadash, and not that it remains as something new, was is shalei be'erkai, which is beyond him, but rather something that you relate to and unfold within you. It's the process of Bina, isn't it? Okay, I got to read a bit more before this. Let's move on. As das darf kommen durch der Aveide von Ihnen nar far der Geula. So this process of appreciating the goodness of Judaism is something that will be prior to the redemption. The Rebbe says, an Aveide lefi erkai, something that relates to you where you're holding now and not being splattered on the cement with a prophecy that you're not ready for, but rather giving the opportunity to train for it. It's a kindness, I'm telling you, that we have another moment to be able to train for this, that you can actually be part of your own redemption, and it's not just imposed upon you, that it gets injected to you in some science fiction movie, but rather something that you contributed to your own flowering and blossoming forth. Tzad achar tzad, step after step, the Rebbe says, v'darga achar darga, climbing one level after another in a spiritual pursuit or religious or whatever you want to say the Rebbe's talking about here. But it's something that you understand and appreciate, and you climb not in a way that's imposed upon you, but rather this force of advice, that the techila, the beginning of it, is a shar, an opening for you to do it prior to its full entrance into the city of that. It speaks about cities in the commentaries here on this verse. It says the gateways, okay, so that's indicative of the city itself as the gateway. Sha'arecha refers to it as. And all your gates, the shar, is the beginning, the opening, the appetizer before you go into the main ballroom. You have a reception. It's the reception. The makabo becomes important. The yayetz has to speak to you in your language. That's the whole point here. And that process is incremental. It's not imposed and exponential. There is a corona that's unfolding now, this exponential growth that will be happening in this area. But this is it's a warning that you're about to take off. So do something now that can guide your own path, because you are guiding it anyways. Whatever you're involved with now will be the path that will unfold in your personal redemption, whatever it is. I guarantee you that, okay? That I'll take the ice bucket challenge. That's the proof of prophecy in our times. If you say a prophecy, you should be willing to take the ice bucket challenge, or you're not the real thing. Today we're learning, I just want to repeat this again, that Besti does not only mean God anymore. Besti and does not only mean your best friend in your real life, which it does also, but it means this what do we call it by Moshe Rabbeinu? Mamutza hamechaber, the intermediary that joins. It's part of you, so it joins. Ish Elokim, he's got both, so he can relate to you. He's got the Yeshua sidekick to be the guy that knows everybody. The perfect idea here of a Yetz embodied in Yeshua, who's the Nar, who's selected to be the one that actually enters the land, not the Moshe Rabbeinu, the scholarly figure, but rather the person who knows everybody. Not the person who had to move his tent away from the people. And the people just like tried to involve themselves in his personal life, what he's doing inside his tent. Why is he going in? Why is he going out? There's this suspicion and mistrust that it's inappropriate. We learned that from Miriam. But they did it to Moshe himself. There's reasons why there are tents, aren't there? And Yeshua, lo yamush mitecha oihel. He did not leave the oihel. The Seymour ain't working. Sorry, I cannot click that. Oh, there we go. I hope after the last time I say that, finally got. There are different modes of locomotion in Zayar. Walking, running. What about jumping? Ratzav shave. And leaping. Okay, there we go. This leaping is the exponential growth. So that we're coming to that, whether we like it or not. Okay? We are coming to that point. There's going to be the flip side of the corona. It's going to be this awakening that's going to be exponential. It will for sure happen. There's no... But if you're sensitive to what's happening, my father saw this catastrophe in the very first days when nobody was talking about it. He saw those headlines and said, this is a catastrophe. He was watching it. He made his own graph. He knew. My father is extremely intuitive. And my grandfather, he got it from his father. Very intuitive. And my father was very into his imagination and science fiction. Therefore, he had this mind that is open. God bless him, he's still alive. To creative vision of the future, and he's just very often right. It's incredible. That could be a little clip for promoting his business, which he wants to retire from. I love Sundays. I'm just saying, Sundays. This is my flip side of the Shabbos. I know Sheishis Yamim Tavoid. You have to work for 6 days. So why am I chilling out? Because this is Melechus Kodesh, isn't it? Isn't this what it's about? So you enjoy it. I enjoy my job also. So what's the difference? It's a type of avodah. You're right, I can't do this on Shabbos. This is my Shabbos with technology. I think that's Melechus Kodesh. I think that's good. And you're supposed to draw Shabbos into your week also. So the ability, we are going to fashion of ourselves, whatever efforts we put into wanting to be part of this process of being receptive to what is happening now, that becomes the vehicle whereby we're going to journey into this, go through this gateway into paradise. Okay, so here I have to read a few more words. Whenever the Rebbe talks about what's happening now, I think that's very important. So from our Aveda Funedid in Darf sein me'ein dem shacha was is mamshech durch der Aveda. Whatever you do, that is what draws down your ability to be a part of some spiritual energy that exists. That's why we shake the lulav and put on tefillin and everything else and eat challah. Was durch dem wird kli pnimi zu der hamshacha. By aligning yourself for the right shape to be able to hold divine energy. Right? You make yourself a vehicle for bringing that force into the world. Is verstandig benidin dinan. Therefore, it's understood in our case from this concept as begedei zu kommen und mekabel sein der matze von Hashiva Sheftayik v'rishonim yatzayik v'atkilo. In order to receive this prophecy that is unfolding now, how do we do it? It says we're going to have the advisors like in former times. B'mais Mashiach, that's going to be in the time of Mashiach. Darf bayin sein me'enze. By Jews, there has to be something that resembles that. You have to train wax on, wax off. You can't just wait till the guy karate chops you. You have to have trained by doing the painting efforts beforehand. The whole exile is seen as a preparation for when you're going to go into the land. You're not going to be foreign to you to serve God, it has to be done in a certain state of victory over the world where we have our own land. That's the whole point of our existence. But to be able to enter that celebration where it's going to be obvious that when you put on tefillin, something fantastic is happening at the time, you have to have done something to be ready for that. And that is actually a gift. You could feel part of the process. Imagine if you'd be instantly the greatest actor and you could, when you're doing your camp play, it took no effort. All that fun time of training with your friends, the bonding experience would have not been there. So we have a bonding experience now, preparing to walk into the main ballroom. We're in the reception, preparing. We're having a few drinks before then and some appetisaries. I like that it's because it mixes the word rotisserie. You can imagine a rotisserie in the center of the room with the appetizer. Okay, we'll have guys like that too. Darf bayin, and so therefore you have to have in the reception before the grand feast, there has to, well, those are my own words. Darf bayin zayin me'einza. There has to be something resembling that in zayin avoda itzter, in your efforts now. As Yiddishkeit und termitz zal bayin zayin in beide eifanim, that your Judaism has to be in two manners. It has to be b'derech shayftayich, the way of judges, Kabbalah sale. There has to be this fundamental deference and acceptance of the yoke of heaven, that there is an authority in the world. So defund the police doesn't mean that we're defunding values. If you need police to enforce that, of course you should have police. But be sensitive to the idea that the police might be getting too much funding, in the sense that we're putting too much emphasis on the idea that you're going to need a guy that wields his mallet and tells you to do something, as opposed to giving values to people that they can understand. Let the people, take them on the Clockwork Orange tours of the people that they hurt. Force them to do that. That's a good policing. Judging, I mean. Force them to visit the sick and see what they did when they, chas v'shalom, hurt somebody. I think that would be much more effective than making them have this opportunity to organize more as criminals together in the biggest prison system in the world, in America. That's our answer to racism. I agree that there has to be efforts to direct resources towards cultural enlightenment, because that is obviously what's motivating whatever evil is left in the world. I think this is the most superficial form of it. I've explained to you the relationship between the color war theory and etc. Shchera Nivinova, I spoke at length about that. Meinze in the Veda Itzter, as Yiddishkeit in terms of Bayim, Zol Bayim Zain in a Beta, if it has to be by Shektai, Kabbalah Sel, Bekiyum Harasa Torah, fulfilling the instructions of the Torah, and Bederech Yaitzaik, but it also has to be accompanied with an advice, as the Harasa Torah Zol Bayim Niskabel Verbe Pnimius, that the instructions of the Torah you relate to. You're a person that's supposed to be aware of what you're doing, and it's supposed to make sense to you, and that is a process that's going to be unfolding now as a preface, as a preparation for the redemption. Azoi via Eitz Tevo. And that's going to happen for the good friend who gives us an Eitz Tevo in a way that we understand how this is good for us. So the Rebbe speaks about prophecy, how it's related to speech. I don't know if it's a bit beyond the scope, I think, to deal with that right now. And he brings the Rambam, which we focused on last week. We have to skip that. Okay, here he says, so he relates this as a prophecy being a preface to Mashiach coming, as this is the force of advice that's going to enter the world. And it's going to come about through a process of the Rebbe's teachings in Chassidus, basically is the punchline. And that's the Nasi who's Shalei Be'erach Fun Di Eivemen is a Nasi who's infinitely great. Of Yigbal Makol Ha'am Mishich Mayim Amayla, head and shoulders above the people. This is the force, and the Rebbe says that it exists within each individual also, and that's actually the point. Here he speaks about towards the end. It says, Al derech zeh is eich befratius in a yidin ba'atzmai. So you have this idea that there's the Rebbe says in the Yesodei Hadas, the Rambam, he's quoting the Rambam here, it's the foundations of the Torah to know that God gives prophecy to human beings. And similarly, you have to have this, the Rebbe says, in the Jew unto every individual Jew, as Erhat and Neshama, because he has a soul, which is a embodiment of the very quality of God Himself, the Mamashis, the Mamal Mamish. Mamish, Eich Beperushay, as das is in Kayim Beifen Nitzchi, literally here also means eternally. So there's this essential spiritual force inside you called the spark of God within you. That's eternal, and it's the core of you. Even as that soul is totally invested within the physical world. So the most intimate part of wherever your fascination lies, wherever your mind really is, you have dragged your godly spark there too. But that is a force which that will allow you to have this unique voice in the generation, which called the Mashiach of the generation, the Moshe Rabbeinu of the generation. And that exists within each person. Und der Rav von Sheftim v'titem lechol b'chol sha'arachu b'steht in dem as the Heiras von dem Shefet in Yeyetz haklali wird nimshach and geht durch dem Shefet in Yeyetz haprati in jeden nefesh helakis. Every soul should be awakened to this force of having these two capacities of a judge that appears within them from like the good angel on your right shoulder. This is if we're not flipping backwards, which it does here. The angel on the right shoulder, you see the sense in that. And the yeyetz is the ability to see that is sensible. That these two forces should shine from your godly soul that's really at your core and eternal within you. As Allah Zayin is Shaurim. These are all gateways of Aram Gashmim, the physical gateways, the sense experience. Während ungefähr durch seinen Gimel Meichim should be conducted by the highest aspects of a hymn called Sheftayich. That everything should be in sync. Und seine Midas Shivalev, and your heart, the qualities of your heart, Seichel Midas von seinen Nefesh Elokis, which should be governed by his godly soul, the intellect and the character that shines forth from his very core. When you dig deeper than Freud says everything is about lust. The Rebbe Rashab teaches them that when you dig one step deeper, you'll find a core that's actually good there too. So don't lop off your personality, Freud. Welcher lernt und versteht der Rasse Torah, befragt, wie es wird erklärt durch dem Shefet der Putquestes Maria Chama Admor und bringt es herab in seine Midas Halev, Ava V'yira Chulu. So there's the ability through the teaching of the Torah as it's expressed through the Rebbe of the generation, which is the Rebbe's father-in-law, he says, and it brings to a good character of love and fear of the right things. Okay, and then I'm just going to skip. That the Rebbe emphasizes that this comes out in one's own household. And the Zay Eich Beklalas Yeser is jeder Ish ve'isha der Shefet in Yeyetz von seine Stub und Bnei Abayis. Every man and woman should be both the judge and the advisor of his household, of the people of his household, rather. No. Von der Stub, his house, und Bnei Bayis, and the people of his household. You're supposed to be both their judge and their advisor. Don't leave the advisor out. It's not just a rule from above, but the ability to communicate that in a way that the person sees it's good for them not to chew with their mouth open. That's Maise Shahaya, true stories. Darfen ze unfehren mit der Stub leite Hera ve'etzes Torah. So it has to be guided from this light of the Torah inside your house, and that's the force of judging and advising that happens in your household and the people of your household itself. And this is never something that goes away. That's because the Rebbe never hidden, just like the Even HaShasiya is not even hidden away. It still exists there, the foundation stone. Even though it's a Nekuda Achas, it contains everything. Akalas Akel. Yashis Chayshach Sisra, it's basically that's the... So we end with the idea of how does this apply to you? Why are we learning at such length? Because this really went on about how the role of the Rebbe is to be the prophet of the generation and all this. I have to make the bridge here a bit more clear about how this relates to Pnimis HaTorah. Because he does relate this distinctively with prophecy, and we did that last week. He says, for Nevuas Meisha, he says, Navi Akim Kamecha, Lahem, Bekerev Acheichem Kamecha, it's going to be like you, the prophet, just like Meisha, God will cause to stand up amongst your brethren, it says. And even though it says there'll never be a prophet like Meisha, it says in the footnote here, Gemar Bracha Lamadalid, no, Seisa Bracha, I guess, Lamadalid Pasuk Yud, Harei Mefarish Teku Famiyad Shezeu Inyan Asher Yedu Hashem Panim El Panim. That's talking about knowing God face to face. Navi Mekirbaka Ma'achicha Kameini, Navi Akim Lahem Mekerev Acheichem Kamecha Kibifnim. So there is this idea that God will grant you a prophet in later generations who is going to be like Moshe himself. And the Rebbe describes this as being able to see from one side of the world to the other with this Ur Haganas, and like the Baal Shem Tov had, and the Mezritch Magid, etc., and all the Rebbeim. And the Rebbe says that as a preface to Mashiach's coming, he has given us such a person in a revealed way. And he gives us the prophecy, which we spoke about last week, that the redemption is unfolding now. And he emphasizes how it has to come into your nefesh bahamas even. We spoke about how it comes through your godly soul, but that has to be communicated. That's the point of the yayatz, the chiddush. That's what replaces the defund the police, is this force of advisory, which is chassidus that affects your nefesh bahamas also. Yes, it's going to step from your nefesh bahamas, your godly soul, but it's going to communicate to your animal soul also. Which will be received in its intellect as an ideological victory over the animal inclination, the regesh adam, and one's own feelings about the world. And the Rebbe relates this to the ability. Okay, here we go. Here's the bridge. I'm going to read this inside. This is very important. So he says the Yitzhak that replaces the defunded police, the ability to communicate to yourself even, was wird niskabel b'seichel v'regesh ha'adam, was durch gil pnimis hater b'chabad shebeseichel, Yitzhak, through the ability for the pnimis hater to influence the intellect itself, so your thinking becomes clear. Biz ba'efen fun taimeh chayim zachu. And this, the Rebbe says something fascinating. What's the point where this will really be pronounced or most expressed or embodied? Is when you've achieved tayameha, the appetitory of it, the reception before the grand feast. Those who taste it before the grand feast, chayim zachu, a merited life. That's the Shar HaKavanas in Tfilas Erev Shabbos. I think that's the Arizal. What? Didn't you think that was a Maimer Chazal? Was durch Te'ima is men tayem de etzem zach. From having a taste of something, this reception that I'm telling you, the Rebbe is saying here, is unfolding now. The ability to have a foretaste, if there's such a word, of the redemption. I like to call it an appetisory. A taste of it, that Te'ima, and the Rebbe relates this to the minhag of tasting everything before Shabbos, that everyone has to go through the kugel, of course, in the cholent. The cholent is not quite ready, only in yeshiva. Vas dirk te'ima is mentayim de etzem zach. When you taste something, even though it's just a taste, you get the very thing itself. It's from the cholent pot itself. Verta shar, that's the ashiva sheikh tayak v'yitzayach kavat chila, the gateway that b'chol sharachal you have to have in all your gates. That's the beginning. Yitzayach kavat chila is the gateway. The gateway is to gilu pnimis hater lasilavai. In order to be able to perceive the inner teachings of the Torah that will ultimately be taught in the future to come, has to be through a taste of it now, because the taste itself is the essence. It's the thing itself. It's not like it's going to be a different quality. He says to gilu pnimis hater lasilavai. You want to be able to receive it in the world to come? Have the revelation of it in the future to come? That is through tasting it now. Is it different? It doesn't say here it's different. It actually says the opposite, that it's the same thing. is men tayim de etzem zach. A taste is the very thing itself. So what does it mean that there's going to be it's a preparation in the sense of it's a gateway to the grand revelation of that in the future to come. It's your ability to say, I did something to prepare. I've straightened my own tie. I'm not a little child who gets dressed, which is, the Rebbe does say is going to happen. They're going to take off our sullied garments, whatever the garments that we didn't do, and the Rebbe says, don't worry about it. It's cool. But it is an opportunity, as you can appreciate from this. If you want to do anything to have merit, that is what you do now. Take off these sullied garments, put on the garments that are worthy of walking into the grand ballroom itself. Which means the thought, speech, and action totally in line with what it's going to be. Und durch der Te'ima v'aschala itzter, and from this taste that you do now, and the beginning it, going through the gateway now, werden Iden und die ganze Welt, Jews in the entire world, become the akli pnimi zu dem gili pnimis Torah. They become an inwardly prepared vessel, a vehicle to receive, or to channel, or to appreciate dem gili pnimis Torah, the revelation of the inner teachings of the Torah, shlach rezel yidei Mashiach tzidkenu, that follow this through Mashiach tzidkenu. It seems to be talking about your own efforts to seek advice through what you deem to be the light of the inner dimension of the Torah. Whatever you do towards tasting that now, that is going to allow you to have your audience with Mashiach himself and be taught that in the future to come. Yes, you are going to do it now, but that is going to lead to this communication with Besti himself, the Rebbe describes here. Besti. That the Rebbe is the Agutter Freund. The Rebbe, the master himself, becomes the guy who teaches you how to paint. Wax on, wax off. Paint on, paint off, or however they say it. Brush on, I don't know. And the Rebbe relates this to translating it, the Torah, and making it palpable to other people, and even the fact that it went into Braille, that the Saginar himself, the Rebbe says, the blind himself could get the light of Torah shining through his too much light that leads to him not to be able to see in the physical world. He could get sight through the fact that the teachings of the Torah became available, accessible to him through Braille. So the more that we pass the baton on to someone who otherwise would not have been able to hear it, we have embodied the Yayetz, which is the Navi. I found at least one source that the Rebbe equated the two. I sort of know where position is on the page, so I think I could find it. Okay, also the Rebbe says that Karishena, Shavtayach vas Shiva, Zainen Kavarishena, but Dargas Rishena, Lifnei Haschalas He'inyan. A Rishain, what do you mean? The judges, like former times, it could be, the Rebbe says here, that's going to be before the thing starts. You have a Rishain that precedes the count. That's what Rishena means. And then you have the ability to join that with your own experience, which is a Yayetz. Okay, that's not what I was looking for. I wanted to see where the Rebbe equates advice to prophecy. Oh, I know where it is. It's right around here. Okay, I can't find it, sorry. It was an interesting point to bring out, but just trust me on that one. There is this connection, this equation of prophecy with it. You would think that it would be, prophecy is something that's imposed on you. But interestingly, it's a very long sikha. I guess that's why it's so hard to find in here. I for sure highlighted it. Maybe I should, like, if they had an easy way to crop out the last part, if I ever do something ridiculous, I would be able to crop out parts easily. It takes forever to do that. I probably even read it at some point in this, but I should be able to find it easy. Here it relates to, I know people like these references. You have two levels. You have the judges, that's Moshe and Aaron, and you have the advisors, it's David and Shlomo, David and Solomon. He speaks about the kfi of the police have to force you, and we don't need that anymore because we destroy the Yetzer Hara. Did I read you that part where we destroy the Yetzer Hara? Okay, it's got lost. It's very long. I just can't believe that I didn't underline the most. Come on, that's not like me. He says, though, interestingly, he says that it's going to go to the Rebbe, Shlacharov al Yedei Talmidav, through his disciples. He's referring to himself here, of course, as a disciple of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, in that, as if saying Navi Sha'ahai Heid Le Navi Acher Shehu Navi, that the Rebbe is saying that the Frierdiker Rebbe basically testified about him, the Rebbe, that he is a prophet, and he refers to himself as his disciple here, Talmidav in plural, which seems to allude to 28th of Nisan, Tafshin and Aleph, and the Rebbe says, I'm giving it over to you, that everybody has to make themselves, not obviously a Rebbe that wears a shtreimel and tells people what to do, but takes on the ability to be self-inspired. Okay, it has to be from a Rebbe, that's what the point of this whole mimer is, this whole sikha is rather. But there's a force within you that you have to summon that allows you to really channel the proper light and advice of the Torah into you. That you have the responsibility to do that. It's the yayatz within you. And I think that's the end of the sikha, emphasizes that, which we spoke about earlier. Here it is. Okay. I get to end, at least I found the source I was looking for, at least one source that makes the bridge. So let's read the whole little paragraph here. Hatman de Hera Canal, as Medarf Mefarsim Zain Chol and Shedar. We learned this last week. We have to publicize to all people of the generation, as Mahat Zeiche Geven, as their Abishar Hat. God appointed, he decided and appointed a Baal Bechira, a mortal being who has free choice, not an angel, who of his own quality is incredibly, it says here, infinitely greater than all the people of his generation, as Zal Zain Sheikhtayach and Yaitzayach, that he can fulfill the role of both your judges and your advisor, und der Navi Hader, and the prophet of the generation, welcher zal anweisen heirassen geben Eitzes beneger to der Weide von Alien. So he equates that with the ability of a prophet to advise. And then he gives the advice that the main prophecy is Alter Lagula and take of Miyad Mamish, Hine is the Mashiach Ba. Immediate redemption and Mashiach's coming now. That's the main prophecy that the Rebbe says as a prophet, and the footnote there says, not as a sage. He's saying this as a prophet, which has certainty. Okay, and the Rebbe says incredible things that now we entered a new time. This is a fantastic sikha, worthy to go through at length. But I know next week, tomorrow, God willing, we're going to move on to Parshas Teitzei. It's about fighting the enemy. When you go out to war, what's your mentality? How do you face an enemy? And we had a little bit of I think yesterday's chitas, the day before, also spoke about that too. Talks about das, lasilavai. Looks like I've spoken about this before. Okay, this is good stuff ahead, I hope. I'm sure. Something Messiah Never Torah's instruction book of advices on how to achieve this. Me'ashilayach. Mesiras Nefesh Bittul is the key to making Nesef a vessel of receipt for shefa. What's self? Making oneself a vessel to receive shefa. That's through bittul. Here the Rebbe spoke about a kind of bittul that is a good advice, that you see that it's good for you to do it. The bittul is more the sheftayach, the accepting the yoke of heaven and the judge. But there's another force that the Rebbe emphasizes here, and I think he associated it most with prophecy, as I just showed one source at least that sort of made the allusion towards it, that it stems from prophecy that's encoded in the teachings of the Torah of the Rebbeim, particularly, or anyone you see as your prophet. I hope God gives you someone that's at least prophetic for you. I cannot believe he would let anyone be alone. That's not the bestie I know. The Rebbe says here that everyone has a bestie in our times, and that's the good advice that you get. The Blavitchers call it the Rebbe. I'm sure that God gives you someone that embodies the voice of that master, that Rebbe, that clarity of vision and direction in your life, in your voice. The Nivsosain, the Nevuah is associated just with utterance. It could come from anywhere. The good advice that just rings true to you and you know that you're doing the right thing. So go with the confidence of a king through your day. Bestie, all of you. Have a good day. Good luck.